Today, we are facing a lot of different discussions and topics. A lot of people are trying to argue against birthright citizenship. We are seeing this mainly in the Spanish descendant populations. Um, and really, the arguments being put out there do not make any logical sense. They are trying to say they aren't Americans because their parents came over illegally just to have the baby or whatnot, um, or got pregnant here and the parents were illegal, so the born child is illegal. And that's just not how our nation works. Birthright citizenship is guaranteed under the 14th Amendment. But to kind of understand um, our immigrant laws, you really need to go back further. This nation was not meant as a nation to have laws dealing with immigrants to the extent that we do today. Not that I disagree with them, the laws that is. I 100% disagree with somebody trying to argue that somebody born here is not a citizen. They are. Deal with it. But the actual, um, like, how we got here, it was an interesting time. Um, Immigration was not a term that we used or really discussed, or our ancestors, that is, in forming our nation. The first 10 amendments, which includes the due process and all these amendments that people like myself are rightfully mad that our people are trying to take away, especially with people born here and so on. Um, During that time, there was no real definition of what actually made a person American besides if they were African American slaves or Indians, American Indians. Every other group, including Hispanics, were considered white. They were given the rights to vote and so on automatically, no questions asked. And in fact, in during the passing of the 10 Amendments to the Constitution, there was no law that decided that even decided who was an American or not. You could just walk over the border freely because we did not have restricted borders. If you were white or Spanish and you walked over the border, guess what? You're an American. Simple. It's, you walk right back over. You Nobody really had a clear definition of what you were. Um, if you lost that citizen, that title, being an American. In fact, the only two laws that were passed in the 1700s in America after our independence was declared that dealt with immigration was one law that said after being here a certain amount of time, you can actually apply to become a citizen. That was the first time. At that point, there was 2 years. And that was a few years after the passing of the Constitution and the amendments. I want to say it was like 1791, or don't quote me on that. And then we had a law that sat there and said that the president can get rid of people of a certain group in very limited situations, such as if they were trying to rebel against the U.S. Very, very limited. And an invasion as well. Those were the only two laws. So in theory, those that passed our Constitution, those that voted for our first set of amendments, the first 10, what were they? they, I guess, were American citizens because they were on the land, but that's all that determined that they were American citizens was that they were here. But the concepts that we have now weren't there. I mean, but then again, would we have called them American citizens? Or just people looking for a better life? Because again, one of the two laws declared you to be an American citizen after you were here 2 years. So what about people before that? So very interesting to get into this. And again, that included Spanish people. That included the same people they are trying to get rid of. It's just so illogical. And I say that included them, and it did include them. And then as we went through, we had Mexican-American War, Mexican-American War, Indian-American Wars, so on as we moved to the West Coast. And as we moved to the West Coast, we started getting people who were clearly of Spanish descent. In fact, at one point, we probably had more Spanish descent people than whites. It gets very interesting. Maybe not more. Well, yeah, maybe. It's very interesting when you think about it, because you had Louisiana, all those New Orleans, Spanish colonies, all Spanish colonies on the West Coast. And just the 13 English colonies. It is such an interesting, complicated thing, but it's also so simple. The reality is that we did not have, when we started our nation, a clear really defined like we do now on immigration and and really who was an American and who wasn't, in the sense that that we do now. But you can look at this even more. The first laws that restricted our borders did not come about until the late 1800s. We let everybody in. Everybody could come in if they wanted to. Anybody could. Before that. And then they had to wait a certain amount of time and apply for citizenship. But if they, I mean, yeah, and if they had to wait. And if they got pregnant and had a child in this time after the 1850s, when the 14th Amendment was passed, they had a child at that time. Guess what? That child's an automatic American citizen. We did not look at, we were not a nation that started off as a place where we had closed borders, where being an American basically, I guess, meant that you had ancestors or whatever that came over from wherever. I don't even quite comprehend what the definition of American is. I guess because I have family that has served continuously since 1775, I'm automatically an American. But I know people who were born elsewhere. They're not in these people's eyes. And I just don't, it doesn't make any logical sense. We are a nation of immigrants. We are, to some degree, still the great melting pot. So, like, arguing, oh, they're not legal they're trying to argue against the Constitution. That doesn't make sense. It doesn't work that way. If you want to change our Constitution, to amend it, to get rid of birthright citizenship, which is in our Constitution, you need 3/4 of the nation's representatives in one way or another to go about it. It's not an easy task. So, yes, anybody born in America is an American citizen. Yes, anybody who was or stepped foot in America in the 1700s, the majority of the late 1700s, anybody that stepped foot did not have to wait to become an American. They were an American the second they stepped foot, and all of the rights were given to them. After we passed laws that said that you had to wait to be an American citizen, you had to wait to be an American citizen, but only for a couple of years you applied and you were able to get in. Again, at that time, still, anybody could walk over the borders. This is what it was. This is how our nation was built and designed. Whether or not that was right, again, I don't necessarily agree with it. I believe in restrictive borders, but I don't believe in the cruelty that we see now. And I definitely don't believe that any one person or 50% of the population can change the Constitution. Our Constitution doesn't work that way. For reasons. We don't want kings. We want to try and protect minorities to the best of our ability. We've always wanted that, technically. We wanted ways to change it, and there are, when a supermajority agree with it. The supermajority nowadays agree that racism is wrong, so blacks have rights. We believe females should have rights to vote, so they have the right to vote. And that's included in our Constitution. So this argument over birthright citizenship does not make any logical sense because it's a part of our Constitution. It's not an argument. You can disagree with the Constitution. Our Constitution is built in a way that nobody's going to agree with every single part of it. But there is not an argument as to whether or not birthright citizenship is legal. It's constitutional. It's part of our supreme law. And again, our nation, when it first started, did not have birthright citizenship. We did not have citizenship in the ideas that we have today. We had citizenship in the ideas that anybody fleeing can automatically or pretty closely become a citizen and have rights as people should. We did not have restrictive borders, meaning we did not limit who can come into our nation. For about the first half of our nation's life so far, our nation, the time that our nation has been around. And even now, the Constitution still now, because we put some of it in our Constitution, and not just regular laws and so on, like we did restrictive border laws and so on. Restrictive border laws aren't part of our Constitution. So at any point, Congress can just say, to hell with it, open up the borders altogether. Not that they would, but they could. And not that I would agree with it, but it could happen. Congress would just need a 51% in the House to pass it. It's not what that's how laws are. But our Constitution, which is separate in in the supreme law of the nation, is much harder to change. And birthright citizenship is part of the Constitution, including, along with, actually, the right for females to vote, the right for African Americans to vote. So it just doesn't make any logical sense. On top of it, we're targeting people who, up until probably about 100, maybe a little bit more years ago, were considered whites. Spanish descendants were considered whites, not WHITE. Yes, you get what I'm saying. They were not considered ever until, again, 100 years ago, from the time of our nation to about 100 years ago, actually before the start of our nation, they weren't considered anything different. We didn't distinguish between Spanish descent and other European descent. They were all European descendants, because technically that's what it is. Spain is part of Europe, people. So we didn't distinguish that. So we're attacking those, trying to make an argument that they shouldn't be here, that our laws in our nation doesn't apply to them, and so on. But in reality, it way more applies to them than it does people like me who are half African American. And we're making these decisions and this argument in this stupidity waste, because it is stupid. You can't say that the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, or first 10 amendments, the amendments that protect due process, don't apply, because they do. They apply because, especially in this situation, because they are Americans. On top of all of this, and this is another kicker, because we didn't think about both white citizenship until the 14th Amendment was passed in the mid 1800s, not late, mid 1800s, when the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments were passed in the 1700s. They applied to every soul that was on the land at the time and today. There is no difference. You can't make an argument that an illegal doesn't have due process rights, because there was an illegal today would not have been an illegal when the Bill of Rights were formed. If you want the Bill of Rights, part of our Constitution, to mean that, you have to amend the Constitution, the supreme law of our land, which is not an easy thing to do. Again, you need a good amount. So, birthright citizenship is legal. And guess what? Due process applies to everyone on our land, because our land was originally open to everyone. This is the reality of our nation's laws. And if you don't really like it, in my view, I don't think you can be an American if you can't accept the Constitution of our nation. And our Constitution is just a way to clear on these issues. Every right that we gained under the Bill of Rights, the 10 Amendments to the Constitution of the United States, applies to every person who is inside the borders of the United States of America, whether they be legal or not. Birthright citizenship applies to every baby in our nation, whether they be legally, whether their parents be legal or not. Our nation was not formed as a nation with restrictive borders. Our nation was formed as a nation with open borders. People who came to the United States originally were, I guess you can call them, outright citizens by just stepping on the land. And eventually we restricted who could become a citizen to a limit by saying after a certain amount of time you can become a citizen. But that still gave anybody the ability to come onto our land and to have the majority of our rights. So even those who are waiting to become citizens have the majority of our rights. It's just so bizarre and so strange to sit here and having to have all these arguments that are, yeah, put forth clearly by people who are either dumb or trying to get other people to be dumb. We did not restrict our borders in the beginning. All this is like just basic and other clear facts. You can't dispute them. In short, birthright citizenship is legal. The rights afforded to people inside the U.S. by the first 10 amendments to the Constitution and the Constitution itself apply to any person with the foot on U.S. soil, whether they be legal or not. These are just undisputed facts.